Vulnerability. Maybe it's when you're not prepared, and so you feel exposed. And there's two ways to look at it, I think, because you can be charmed by vulnerability, but you can also be completely, savaged by it too.
I'm lucky to have the opportunity today to speak with you, JC. I'm really looking forward to learning more about the work that you do and some of the projects that I've seen you share on Instagram. I would just start by asking you to describe how you became an artist.
I became an artist, I think, with the desire to be a better storyteller. And I think that was something that was always in me. I always wanted to tell stories one way or the other. And I went to film school, so I started in film. And then as time, went through, I started to play with different mediums more and more. And, I liked film very much, but I also wanted something that was a bit out of the screen, and wanted to try to do something that involved a little bit architecture, space, things like that. And so it just, it gradually progressed. I started to have shows here and there, and then I started to use the space to add to the shows a little bit. So to create a physical space that made you interact a little differently with the work. And I was fortunate enough to work with some very great artists who, offered their techniques. And so I started to play a little bit more with what they were doing, and then slowly coming into my own, and eventually found my voice. It wasn't like it was, I would say relatively recently, I felt finally comfortable with what it is I'm saying and how I'm saying it. So it took a while.
I actually wanted to take a step back even from then, because I realized as I was asking you, did you ever hesitate about calling yourself an artist, or were you ever shy to proclaim yourself to be an artist?
Of course. And still to this day I am, because I think it means a lot of different things to different people. I think there's a certain arrogance to it, because it means that you're somehow validated by others to be an artist, right? So somebody else put you in that frame, and then because somebody else did that, then you can call yourself an artist. I'm not really sure that's true. I mean, I think being an artist just means, I think you kind of master some kind of a craft, and you're able to take something and make it your own. So being an artist doesn't necessarily mean that you're a painter. It could be a lot of things, but it's when you say that, especially, because you work as an artist, but people, I think, don't necessarily think of that directly. They just think of someone who thinks maybe and a bit more bohemian and that sort of thing. But I would say that the hardest work I've ever had to endure is probably as an artist over anything else I've ever done before.
You talked about using many different kinds of media, and even using the space within which your work is displayed as part of the experience. Mm-hmm. And you also described yourself as a storyteller. So what would you say are the stories, regardless of medium, what are some of the stories that you try to tell through your work?
I think primarily I speak about identity and the concept of identity, and who we are, and how we wish to be seen or accepted by others. That's the main thing. I've always been very interested in, I did work where I went to conflict zones, for example, and I was always interested in finding out what it means to be from a smaller place, and what it means to be, predominantly one thing over another. I'm a mix myself. I mean, my father's French, my mother's American, and so having a name like my name, Jean-Christophe, is very difficult to say that, especially in New York, it's a little different, but in other places, I'm immediately put into a category. and I'm nothing. I'm nobody. And I'm thinking about everybody else who is a mixture of things that no one pays attention to. In France, for example, there's a lot of people who are born in France and live there most of their adult lives in France, but don't really feel French. And there's this separation of belonging to a place where you live and then wanting to be part of something else. I live in Brooklyn, and where I live in my neighborhood, Kensington, it's little Bangladeshi, but I'm very close to Borough Park, which is the Hasidims. And, on my street alone, I hear, Ukrainian, I hear Mandarin, sometimes French, Russian, of course, and Bengali. They live here and they have an attachment to their place, but they're also making their own identities here. And so that's probably some explanation they have to go through whenever they go back to their, not necessarily country of origin, but where they're supposed to be from, quote unquote. I was always fascinated by the role that identity has. And I think that fueled a lot of the projects I did, including Transmission, because this speaks about, disease and disabilities, but I think that also takes precedence. You see somebody who has a disability, and that's the first thing that comes to mind. They carry that more than who they really are. And I think with everything that's been happening in the past several years, like the pandemic has really fueled a lot of some kind of just maybe pent-up aggression about, justice, and people really want to be, recognized for who they are, but not just because of one thing. And I think that's hopefully coming to a head, and people are going to start to speak about that more. There's a whole, there's obviously the race issue, and I'm not convinced that people want to always be divided into categories, but they want to be acknowledged also for them too. So it's a dichotomy of things that makes it difficult, and I think it's a complex issue. And hopefully, we're able to speak about it in a way that's a bit more straightforward without being too scared about what it is we're saying. And I think this is a big part of identity too.
How much of that categorization comes from outside, do you think? And how much of it is we actually step into that definition of ourselves when we feel like we're a type of something that's different from other people?
Well, I think it goes back to the same question, about, what it's like to be called an artist. I think people, there's validation that's coming from the outside. There's what people think of certain people. And then there's what you think. They can be conflicting. And I think, when you're trying to figure yourself out, I think that's probably a lifelong journey, usually. I've never met somebody very rare that I've met people who, are so quick to say, I'm this and from here, and that's my identity. Even if they're quick to say that, I think when you start scratching the surface, they speak about other things that makes it a little bit more complex. We've really pushed ourselves between two types of categories, and it doesn't really exist that way, And there's also a lot of people who there's been a divide of people who are right and people who are wrong, and there used to be, a few years ago, you could really disagree with someone but still be with them. And now you have to pick your camp, and I think this is problematic in finding out what our identities are, because it's too broad and it's just it's unfair.
Yeah, no, I think that's hugely important. I think the ability for us to be able to have meaningful debate and disagreement while still respecting each other's position has almost disappeared.
Yeah, I hope it hasn't completely disappeared. I don't, my life in New York stays the same. It's very eclectic, very rich culturally, and I'm very happy about that. When I travel outside, I see different things, and you were bombarded with whatever's on media, all types of media, social media, and now there's the power of anyone, anonymous or real, that really pushes an idea, and somehow we get kind of lured into those debates, whether or not they're worth it. And so a lot of energy is consumed on trying to get your point across, and I think it shouldn't be lost there. Your energy shouldn't be completely lost on trying to convince somebody else. It's not really about that. It's just about you feeling comfortable enough to explain who you are as a person, and then having somebody either share that joy with you because you've come that far, or not. But it's not about you trying to convince the other all the time. And I think that's the problem that we're facing now, is we're always trying to convince somebody that they should believe in what we believe in. And it becomes a little bit exhausting and superfluous, in my opinion.
It just reminded me, because I did my undergrad in philosophy, and I got so used to not understanding. I got used to being wrong. I got used to having to review and reread and rethink and learn a lot from other people, that I think that was one of the things that's had the most impact on the way that I think in my life. To just get used to being uncertain and wrong.
Yeah, and that's fine. And I think that's part of the human experience too, is that you always make missteps all the time. And I think the crucial part is not necessarily understanding, but having the power of observation, and being able to see that you're doing that. It's we can't lose our empathy, and I think it's okay to make the wrong decisions. It's fine to underline those wrong decisions. It's right. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be right. It's all those things that are completely fine. It's not. There's no really right or wrong answer anymore. Everybody, I think, in many ways, agree more than they disagree, but somehow they just can't find this middle ground to speak about it. But they're usually fighting for the same things.
I think you're right. And maybe there's just a 5% difference, but people pick that hill to die on. Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We need to be 100% in agreement here. Otherwise, we can't accept each other.
That's right.
And I think that ties in nicely to what you said earlier about how we're all in process anyway. So it can't really be one right or one wrong answer, because we don't know what it is, because we're all still sort of in movement, figuring ourselves out.
Yeah, and society is constantly progressing, and things that were okay a decade ago maybe aren't okay now, and the things we're doing now maybe not be okay in 10 years, and then the things that weren't so good maybe are going to come back as being not so bad. So it's we're just taking from that palette and seeing what really sticks on the day. But the main, my main model, like the thing I try to really live by, is just trying to be as kind as possible. And if you have that empathy in you, just to being kind, you can achieve a lot of things, and you hear a lot of different things, and people will also in kind listen to you too.
I'd like to circle back to the project that you mentioned, Transmission. Can you tell me a bit about that project and how it started?
Yeah, Transmission started at the beginning of the pandemic, around March, April of 2020. And the sole reason really for starting that project is because my friend James, who has multiple sclerosis, was stuck in England. He lived in Brooklyn. He's got three kids, a now divorced wife, but he was leaving at the time to go back to England, where he's originally from, to take some time off because things were a little bit difficult at home. And I was traveling to Moscow, and we both got stranded there because of the pandemic. So he was going to be gone for, I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. And I left, on Valentine's Day. And then, a month later, basically like all the air traffic stopped. And so we, our fates were sealed. And I spoke to him regularly, and his MS was, not doing very well amongst everything else that was happening with him. And I was trying to find a way to kind of keep him alert. So I started the project Transmission I didn't know what to do, and we were limited on how we could work, so I just started to write things, diary, fiction, little stories, and I would write to him and forced him to write back. So he had to be involved and committed to write something, and it had to be well written. I really wanted him to spend the time to write something well, and correcting the grammar is one thing, but I really wanted him to like re-edit and look at the text and make it correct and send back something. So when I would read it, I would be consumed by it, and I would feel the obligation to respond, and so on and so forth. And very early on the project, after a few entries, I took a few excerpts from it, and I sent it to some people that I knew or that didn't know, and I asked them to read it, record it, and send it back to me. And I sent it to him so he could listen to the text that was being written, either by me or by him, or sometimes mix into both and have somebody else read it. And so right away, the disconnection between voice and author realigned perspective for us. And so we were able to listen to what we were really saying through the help of somebody else. And we liked the idea of that. And I decided to work more with multiplying the narrative, the same narrative, really, with different people. You go to the same end, but you go a different way of getting there. So if I say something in French, I'm going to describe it a little bit differently than I would in English or in some other language. And I found that to be very important because it basically picks up all the little details that you might forget, and it adds a lot of flavor to the story. But more importantly, it just gives you a little bit more. It gives you a little bit more to chew on, and then it just gives you better pause for reflection, for self-reflection.
The readings are very haunting and lyrical and quite beautiful, dark, but very beautiful. How was the experience for him?
In his words, he said that basically it took him out of a very, very dark space, which was the main reason for me to do any of this, was to take him out. He, sometimes he would speak about the unspeakable and, being so far away and without any means to see him. It was very difficult. And there was a few letters like that were, where I had to call him as soon as I got it, and I just had to, and it's difficult. He was in the process of basically losing his wife. He didn't know what kind of relationship he would have with his children. He was losing control of himself. And he was in a place where he was far away from it all. And I thought the pandemic was quite, in the very beginning, did a lot of the same things to everybody else that has been going on with him for years, which is this isolation, feeling scared all the time, losing control, extreme anxiety. Sometimes I was very careful about what I would choose to share back with him. And then sometimes when I did it, I made sure that we were on the line together. But it turns out that the darker the things were, the more it actually took him out, because he had he's creative himself, and he was able to see that. He was touched by how the strength of it all, and that kind of gave him power to kind of come out of it and be a bit more forceful about how dark things were and more direct about it too. It's
that feeling of connection with other people too. even when you're sharing something that's very difficult, that ability to connect. I can't imagine how powerful it must be for you two to hear your words spoken by other people.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, a lot of the times I can't remember if he wrote it or I wrote it. And it sounds so much better when somebody else is reading it. And it sounds smarter and it sounds like more put together. We weren't creating a film, and we were creating really more of a soundscape. And then, of course, there's some videos and some visuals attached to it. But I really wanted that to be, I did want to have some kind of separation. I really wanted people to concentrate more on the sound rather than the videos, which is difficult in this day of age because we're consumed by video. And it doesn't really matter how good it is. In fact, it can be pretty bad, but still we're drawn to it like, casino lights. And so I wanted to have this connection too. And, I chose visuals that were, that my great uncle used when he traveled to New York in 1970. Sometimes I use my photographs. I did something. I always try to create something at least once a day, because I know that he was my sole audience. He was the most important person in the front row for me. And some of the people, there's this one woman who read for us from London. And sometimes MS hits you in different ways. And for some people, you can have problems speaking. And this woman, she did it without a second thought. She was really into doing it. But she was a little worried that the voice would be really bad. And sometimes when I'm editing the audio, I cut some of the gaps and try to clean it up a little bit. But in this case, I left most of the pauses. And I thought it was very poignant. And I sent it back to her and I said, listen, before I publish this, I want you to look at this, tell me what you think about it. I think it sounds great. And she liked it. And in fact, other people commented on it. And I'm thinking, how long did she spend thinking that her voice didn't sound good and maybe omitted some of her vocal strengths just because she thought that was, she was not speaking the right way. And, on the contrary, if you speak with firmness, even with some mistakes, it doesn't really matter. And mistakes is such a loose word because it's not really a mistake. It's just the way that you're now speaking, and any tools at your disposal is part of your speech, whether it's great pauses or some kind of a speech impediment, it's still part of the way you will be expressing yourself. And she was able to finally use it. Well, not finally, but I used it in a way that I thought was gave more depth than just if somebody else read it, for example.
But those things are very closely linked, right? Like your sense of identity and the way that you express yourself. So identity and self-expression are, if it's authentic to who you are as a person, then it is going to sound right. It can't sound wrong.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you should always tell the truth, and the truth always. And what I mean by truth, I mean have the sense of honesty in what you're saying, because sometimes especially people who have skills, communication skills, are able to hit on other people's emotions and tones differently. But when you're being honest, you're actually, I think, really communicating for the first time in things that are absolutely bewildering and stunning and really move you. And it can be very simple. When I listen to podcasts and, I'm walking around, like the intimacy of sound is always, it's so warm. It's very different. And a lot of that is because there's, I think, a lot of honesty in that. And you relate to it. It makes sense. You tune into it naturally, I think.
There is something intimate about podcasts in a way. I love the visuals that you put with the audio recordings. I think they're quite stunning. And they're also they're not distracting because they're I don't think of the right word, but they're impactful, but they're not distracting from the audio at all. So the audio is still primary, even with the visuals that you had that go along with it. There's something about the way you've done that, which works really, really well. And then podcast would be one more step into you can just shut your eyes. You don't have to, there's no visual stimulus at all. And you're really just concentrating. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people fold their laundry when they're listening to podcasts, walk their dogs, and so they're not attending 100%. But there is an immediacy to it that you're just connecting on that one through that one sense. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it transcends quickly because you're not competing with other visuals that you try to decipher while you're listening to something. Mm-hmm. So it's visuals can be distracting because I think foremost they're overwhelming and you're looking for something in them all the time. While sound, it's like someone right next to you, and once you tune in, you tune in. And transmission now is probably going to go into a different realm. We're trying to get more and more people involved all the time and make it grow, but eventually it's going to be bigger than what was set out in the first place. So now we have to be prepared to see what kind of face it's going to have, and we're in the process of figuring that out.
Nice. It must be so exciting to watch it grow. It developed from where it started into something you're not sure what yet, but is going to grow into something.
It's nice to read back a couple of years ago and see what we were thinking, and then to look at it now, because what I read isn't really so much about the pandemic. I'm reading a little bit more about the fear and joys of life, basically. One of the things about what was happening back then is I felt with myself and with James that he was mourning not so much the immediate loss of life that changed because of the pandemic and his disease and his separation from his wife, but he was mourning a life that he didn't have anymore. And that is something that happened a little bit before all of that, so you're constantly thinking about something you think you had or that you were living, and he woke up one day and realized that this was not the case anymore. And it wasn't really because of the pandemic or the MS. It was other things, but those were added ingredients in that cocktail, and which made it very difficult to understand where things were coming from. But I think like any kind of nostalgia or people feeling, sadness about what was before is they mourn a life that they were so accustomed to. So while you're transitioning between the old life and the new life, you're very unsettled. And I think this is, it takes a lot from that. Transmission takes a lot from that little moment of of being unsettled.
I think that's interesting because I think if I understand, you're talking in a way about his sense of identity, his sense of self, and sometimes you don't realize it's already passed. So you're still sort of thinking, oh, I'm still that person. And then you suddenly feel the ground beneath your feet give because you realize I'm not that person anymore. And I didn't know that. And maybe it's because of life circumstances or just your evolution as a person, but catching up to where you are again can be pretty scary.
It is. It's very frightening. And I think you start to, you're always coming of age somehow.
Thank you so much, JC. I really appreciate your time. It was great to get to know you.
You're welcome, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye.